Hello and welcome to this virtual panel discussion looking at the early lessons of television and advertising as we settle uncomfortably into this COVID-induced world of confinement. My name is Justin Lebbon and I'm the co-founder and director of Mediatel events, and it is my pleasure to host an august lineup of industry professionals to learn how to manage this crisis from their respective roles and to look at the future and how they believe we will come out of this as an industry. I'm joined today by Kurz, who's the SVP of Global Consumer Insights from Viacom CBS, the very famous Sam Taylor, who is head of commercial and performance marketing at Direct Line Group. And lastly, but not least, Natalie Marshall-Foxwell, who's the managing partner of PhD in Manchester. Hello and welcome to you all. Now, the first area we want to look at is just the current landscape to understand what has happened to the various businesses we have represented here today. I'm going to start with broadcast, and so that's with you, Christian. So what have you noticed sort of from a top level, looking at all of Viacom's assets since COVID hit? And I think it's worth reminding people that you don't just own traditional linear channels, you own OTT platforms, news, entertainment, production, and studios.
Yeah, and the movie studio, right? And nobody's going anywhere near cinemas at the moment either. But yes, so hi everyone, thanks for having me on this panel. Obviously, we all know that with people confined to their homes across the world, there is an uptick in entertainment consumption going on, and that clearly means that people are watching more in general, right? They're watching more in a linear capacity, they're watching more in an on-demand space, they're watching more in an SVOD space, because there is more both time available to be used in that way. Nobody's commuting for hours anymore, but also there's clearly an increased appetite for information, news and information, which of course is part of our business as well, but also for entertainment and distraction, if I can word it that way. So we've definitely seen across the world a significant uptick in how much entertainment or video people are consuming overall, which is of course interesting because you're also on the other hand seeing, as you said, scripted productions have shut down, with the first ones only just starting to come back in a very different way. So that means eventually some of these platforms are going to run out of content because we're running out, which means that we're seeing news obviously adapt very quickly in the US. All of our CBS News properties are broadcasting from people's homes. Our morning show, CBS This Morning, has 3 hosts that are all in their own houses talking at consumers directly. But then also we're producing a whole bunch of stuff that is possible to produce in these smaller areas. Like today we announced Stories from the Balconies, which is one of our Southern European productions that is basically starting to tell some of these things. So it's how to fill the pipeline, but overall there is more appetite and more consumption going on overall.
Do you see there being a content production glut then in when we start to return to normal times? Because during this time we would be producing stuff for early next year and late next summer, for example, but those productions would be stalled at this point in time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I don't know that it's going to turn into a glut because I think everything is just being pushed back. And just like movie release dates are moving and being pushed back, I wouldn't be surprised if the fall season on the US networks would not be fall, but maybe January. So I think there's a lot of stuff that's simply being pushed back with people tidying over with this special programming that they're commissioning now, and then producing through as stuff becomes realistic again.
Okay, so we'll be watching lots of reruns of Friends then, it seems. So Sam, just returning to you, maybe let's just start with what's happening in the insurance industry sort of during the crisis and what the sort of marketing and media response should be to it.
So the insurance industry is slowing right down, as people would expect. Because it's just not front of mind for people. They've got more important things to worry about, and insurance isn't up there as the most important thing anyway that people decide to engage in on an ongoing basis. So it has slowed down, and But what we find is, we don't have ongoing engagements with customers anyway, unless they claim, unless they renew, unless they buy. So we're not seeing a massive impact there. However, as you would expect, there might be some things that come out like, less car crashes because of less people driving, etc. But obviously we don't see that until probably later on in the year, once those changes in behaviour have kind of played out. So, it's a most difficult time for us, same as most businesses, is understanding how we, as a big organisation, a big group of many brands, work in a way where we maintain our marketing strategy, in a way that we maintain our collaboration in the department, and more importantly, our collaboration and working relationship with our frontline staff, who are now all working from home. So that's probably has been, in recent 4 or 5 weeks, our biggest focus.
Yeah, I know. I took a look at your share price, Sam, and I noticed in March, as with many businesses, it took a huge hit, but it's since recovered. When that sort of thing happens, do you get instant pressure on your department when share prices drop that dramatically?
No, not directly on the department in that sense. There's movement all the time. I think the most important thing, as any marketing department focused on effectiveness, is to really not let the short-term impact drive change in what you're doing in your strategy. So what we will have been looking at is primarily, what's our brand strategy? How do we adapt that based on what's currently going on? Because obviously we don't want to be over-promising things we can't deliver in our pipeline in terms of claims, etc. What's our performance strategy? Because we want to stick to our ROI challenges. We don't want to maintain spend if it's not driving return. So how do we optimize that? But also what's been really important over the last few weeks is ensuring we manage our marketing spend in line with our capacity on the front line, because there's no point in increasing new business sales volume if there's no one answering the phones. And we did have to turn the phones off for new business for the first couple of weeks, because we'd gone from 1,500 people working in the office to 50 people working at home. So a massive drop off in capacity. So those have been our main concerns. What we do going forward in our mid to long term plan is very different, and that's where we're now starting to inject energy into kind of what does that mean for us in the rest of Q2 and into the rest of H2.
Yeah, we're going to dig into that a little later. So thank you very much for that, Sam. So Natalie, before we talk about media and marketing, I'm just wondering how your agency is handling the crisis in what must be a particularly challenging time for your business.
Yes, I'll say. I think we've all sort of lived 2 years in the space of a month, haven't we? Well, for our business specifically, we obviously work with a really broad range of sectors, and pretty much everyone in one way or another has been affected. So we work with sectors including banking, retail, supermarkets, travel, you name it. During the early stages of the lockdown, we had to really quickly recalibrate what the specific situation was for each of those clients and how we could best support them, because clearly, one size fits all wouldn't work. Some of our businesses have been very materially affected. So, travel industry is an obvious example. Some have had their usual routes to market temporarily blocked, like automotive. Some have been impacted by sport being cancelled or supply chain issues that have just been mentioned. That stuff seems to be very, very common at the moment. And in those instances, our role has been absolutely to help those sort of businesses emerge from this in a position of strength. Conversely, we do work with some categories and businesses that are having to manage very sudden increases in demand. So supermarkets, for example. And our role there has been to help them manage their comms and messaging and react very quickly in media. And I'm sure we'll come on to this later, but in channels like TV, where they're not known for that historically.
Sorry, I was on mute there. One of the issues with this is not just the companies that can't operate, so therefore they can't market. There's some businesses out there that are doing so well that they've switched off marketing channels. So across the board, what have you found, if you can generalize it, what is the sort of, how down are you on sort of client media spend, if you can put a figure on it?
Ooh, it's difficult to put a precise figure on it. You'll share that information, but I suppose what we can say is initially, and quite understandably, we did see a lot of clients pull activity until they understood more about what was going on and what the impact would be to their business. then we did start to see clients reassess. So thinking about different messaging, different routes to market, and then kind of deferring to later, or start planning for what happens in lockdown. So, yes, money's definitely sort of left the market, but actually a lot of it is more in the sense of deferments, and obviously everyone hoping that there'll be some semblance of normality to come in a few months' time, and when things start gearing up again.
Yep, we're all waiting for normal times to resume. So thank you, everybody. That gives us a good overview of the situation from your particular fields. Now, this area here we're talking about is what can we do about it? Because there's only so much moaning even the British can handle regarding this situation. So this part is about what can we do with the cards that we've been dealt? And we're going to focus on television, as that's what the event is all about. So Christian, you can start with this. We've obviously seen a bump in eyeballs. So what are you doing to exploit all this extra attention?
I think exploit is probably not the word I would use, simply because we do, first and foremost, particularly from a TV perspective, look at our responsibility to the consumer and to the viewer, as that's what we're really trying to do right now, is we're trying to keep people informed and people entertained. How we then make money out of that is secondary to a degree, but obviously it becomes incredibly important the longer the situation goes on, right? You can take ads out for breaking news for a day, but you do that for a few months and you're starting to have a problem. So what we're trying to do is to encourage our clients and just advertisers and media partners in general to continue communicating to their customers, to our viewers, and for many, many different reasons, right? We just heard already how supply chains are changing, how the way people buy a car are evolving and changing. And once you have figured that out, and once you can buy a car remotely, if you choose to do that, then clearly there has to be communication and to the consumer telling them how to do that, and that you can do that now, right? Obviously, we've partnered a lot with local authorities, charities, all those types of things to get their messages across as well. And we just fundamentally believe that communicating through a crisis is incredibly important, and then sets brands up for success once we get back to normal, or to a new normal, or whatever this looks like when we're getting into fall or whatever it is where there's changes. So I think overall it's about continuing to encourage people to communicate. And then secondly, it's also working with them. As we've heard already, the TV industry isn't necessarily known to be the most quick and responsive when it comes to changing our creatives and doing things like that. And I think us and the entire industry, we've tried to pull out all of the stops possible in a world where everything is being edited remotely and being put together remotely as well, right? So you're adding complications to that. But to be able to be flexible. And we've seen some really, really good creative examples of how people are starting to put things together and how things start getting on air really, really quickly. So I'm hoping that we're getting into, what is this, week 7 or something? We're getting into a process where there's new workflows that are facilitating some of those quick changing messages, because that's the other thing. You don't want your ad to be advertising something that you don't have anymore. So there's a lot of that thing as well, which brings me back again to say that brand communication as opposed to tactical sales communication is probably more appropriate at this time, because you're trying to make people feel safe and good and get a good opinion of your brand or your company.
Yeah, we're going to come on to sort of brand and sort of sales activation messaging in a moment. But when things settle, as we love to talk about, what do you see advertisers really want in Q3, Q4 when they start picking up spend?
Well, I hope that spend is going to get re-picked up before Q3, Q4. I really do think that we're getting to a point where it's about time to communicate broadly. But other than that, I think we're almost going back to normal. It's like, yes, the message may be changing and the distribution channel may be changing, but the need for communication doesn't go away. And if this has showed us anything, is that in terms of need and in terms of crisis, people turn to the well-known mass communicators that tend to be the big TV channels, because that's where the trustworthy and the trusted information comes from, as well as also the great entertainment that makes us all feel like we're part of something bigger, right? Because we are all in this together, and that is a communication that that tries to be sent through, and when music artists from across the world get together and put a concert on for Global Citizen and the WHO, and all of the major channels and networks around the world are participating in that, that makes us feel better, right? It brings us closer together as a society, and that really is something that is largely being achieved through broadcasting, right? We're sending the same message to multiple people rather than narrowcasting. And I think the same is true for communication by brands and marketing.
Well, we all know broadcasters are sometimes a little slow to move with the times, and perhaps this unfortunate incident, if you like, will force them to pivot and innovate a little bit more quickly. And we'll actually ask Sam about that in 2 seconds. But quickly, Sam, before that, what can media offer you during this time to protect your investment, or maybe indeed squeeze a little bit more money out of you?
So it depends on what all the different objectives you're running for your media plan. So one of our big focuses is customer comms. So we're doing a lot more below the line to make sure our customers are informed of everything we're doing. That is funded from somewhere. So we need to make sure we're managing our media spend effectively during that time to make sure we can afford to uplift our comms to customers, because that'll always be the priority during change. So that's the first thing. Second thing we're doing is then looking at what's our performance plan, what's our brand plan. Performance plans, obviously, when you've got changes in market, that can either be negative because our conversion's worse, therefore our ROI is worse. So that will put pressure on what we can afford to spend. But then conversely to that, then we've got the benefit of TV deflation, which can add value in terms of our ROI, increasing our reach, potentially increasing our frequency as well. So it depends, depends on what lens you look at it through. And then brand, if we've got a core brand objective of reaching a certain reach, frequency, brand KPI for the year, then it's a great head start because we'll get more eyeballs for the same money. So broadcast creates a benefit for brand and performance in cases, but may for other brands not. So it's a key thing for us is to assess everything. The next challenge then becomes, well, if we want to change the role of media and change the strategy, to what degree can we? So what flexibility is there in the marketplace on different media channels to actually be able to enforce changes through deferring money, moving money, changing plans, changing creative, and rolling out new creative with minimal cost and penalties, etc. So that also becomes part of the ongoing conversation, and will continue to be as the market changes, people's behaviours change. So at the moment, we've got the opportunity to do more, the opportunity to change our spend, defer money. I think what this has taught us as a business and as an industry, from the feedback I'm getting from other clients within my kind of ISBAR TV group that I lead, is that this is proving the need for increased flexibility on TV, because those businesses that can embrace that are those that aren't able to embrace it can't. And I think what this is proving is that when you're looking at increased spend or increased reach, increased frequency, then it's then charging you to look at, well, what's my response curve? What is my best use of spend? If I'm hitting more people, do I take money out, or will that impair my frequency? Because you've got to remember that getting more reach, more eyeballs on programs doesn't necessarily deliver on your frequency target. So all these sorts of questions become important to then go, well, do we need to rely more on broadcast VOD than we did before? Is there an opportunity there to hit younger people, more eyeballs there? Should we be reassessing what our role of radio is on our plan? So there's really an ongoing thing, and we're having media conversations on a daily basis that are driving flexible decision-making, agile decision-making that we've never really needed to do in the past. And all I hope is that this increased flexibility is something that we can hold on to as an industry and move forward and go, well, what does that mean for the future?
That's a really good point. And I want to sort of ask you, do you think this is a moment for broadcasters to sort of work better together to make TV a more sort of efficient process? It's something that you've been campaigning for some time. Do you see positives coming out of like that?
I absolutely see positives probably on two fronts. First is, one of the things I've been trying to root for is unified measurement and understanding the true opportunity that audio visual has on plans as incremental reach. So where's the right place for VOD to sit on a plan? Where's the right place for addressable, even YouTube, to sit on an AV plan rather than them running in parallel kind of reach curves? So I think the more we move money to the other areas, the more this becomes important to measure and monitor. But one thing that I think we can't let happen as an industry. And I think there's conversations already happening around moving minutage to reduce impacts in the current period, to then move to impacts at the end of the year, then balancing out a deflationary period and an inflationary period, which I think is wrong. I think this is where station average price as a model lets us down. And I think rather than changing the rules in the existing model, we need to change the model. We need to let this be a moment where we can reflect and go, well, in a world where there will be fluctuations in viewership, changes in revenues, how do we protect the advertising industry as a whole from that? And that's not just about protecting broadcaster revenue, it's protecting the industry as a whole. Again, how do we manage TV in the future in a way that's most effective for brands, advertisers, agencies, broadcasters, and indeed customers?
So Natalie, what are you seeing from television and indeed other media that sort of surprised you during this time? And what would you like to see more of? And finally, from a sort of agency perspective, are you able to take advantage of all this attention, of all these eyeballs that are now presented to you?
Well, in terms of what we're sort of seeing from TV and other media that has perhaps surprised, I mean, all the points that have just been made about, credit where it's due, the TV industry has had to transform itself pretty much overnight. And not just the broadcasters, but everyone that's associated with, getting media live on television. So in terms of how stuff is produced, in terms of how quickly agencies are able to turn things around, and also how quickly brands are able to make decisions when needs must. All of this stuff I really hope sticks. I think there's, a few interesting points have been touched on. How programming is developed is quite interesting to me. So, we're sort of used to working in a world of, particularly for our bigger brands, where, they're working with some quite sort of high level talent who are used to very polished studio settings. And they're now having to film voiceovers, and shoots in their own homes. And, I think everyone's sort of getting used to that, and it's becoming much more normal to see that on TV. I'm sure obviously when things do kind of relax a bit, we'll still use studios again, but it's just a lesson in, we can do this stuff if we want to. We can do things quickly if we really want to, and actually still be really impactful with it. One of the most surprising things I've seen, probably more from a consumer perspective, is the not just the country warming to the role of brands in the space of sort of doing good, but actively now expecting it. This has been a huge area of cynicism for brands, I think, in the past. But at the moment, as long as it meets a genuine consumer need and it's in the right tone of voice and it's not jumping on a bandwagon, the tracking that we're seeing is that audiences are really, really receptive of it. And as I said, actually expecting it. One of the best initiatives I've seen in terms of TV recently has been the NHS Charities Together. So brands donating the airtime that they can't now use. Actually, one of our clients, North Face, has been involved in that recently, and it's just a really nice way to sort of give something back in a very organic way that sort of means something. You mentioned about taking advantage of the extra eyeballs. Well, yes, I mean, in theory, it's easy to sort of get carried away with all the headline stats about, there's X percentage more value in the market, stuff's going to get really, it's going to get cheaper, X, Y, Z. But to be honest, you've still got to look at it on a case-by-case basis, depending on the client. Lots of daytime eyeballs might not be the right thing for you as a brand. In some instances, as we've said before, it might just be that you haven't got things set up to be able to market yourself right now, or it might not even be appropriate to market right now, depending on what category you're in, of course. So we have seen, I think, to the point Sam made, we have seen some smaller brands who have previously found TV cost prohibitive. The deflation means they can now use that channel. Obviously that's been a largely good thing. We have also seen products and services that are particularly in demand at the moment, like Sainsbury's and Argos are in our portfolio. They're obviously getting far more value and reach for their money, but to the point you made earlier, you've still got to work really hard at containing that and making sure it's the right message going out at the right time, not just kind of airtime for the sake of it. But yeah, interesting times.
Okay, this is theory versus reality. And it's one of my favorite topics because It inspires lots of debate because, frankly, it's based on opinion. First of all, I'm going to go around the board to see who you agree with, either Sir Martin Sorrell or Mark Ritson, Peter Field, IPA, and the host of Think TVs that have shared this particular research. Both are arguing opposite corners, and I am sensationalizing it a touch for the benefit of our viewers to encourage a spicy debate. Very briefly, a century of empirical evidence says the smart move is to either maintain or even increase ad spend in the current months. So you come out of this, let's call it a recession, hitting the ground running. But Sorrell argues people saying brands should spend their way through a recession or this recession are talking nonsense. Sorrell says brands were quite right to really batten down the hatches at the beginning of the second quarter. He added also, what we will see is an acceleration of what packaged goods firms were already doing. They will cut budgets and shift to digital. We realize that people are at home talking to each other via digital technology. They'll also be using home deliveries as never before. Now, there's a couple of things to unpack there. And Natalie, I'm going to start with you. Which camp are you in and why?
Well, I think it's important to be clear. Ritson is talking about what he thinks brands should do, whereas Sorrell is obviously talking about what he thinks brands will do based on, his experience of seeing how the market tends to behave during recessions, and he's witnessed probably umpteen of them. They're obviously both right in their own ways, but I do think we need to caution against assuming this period is going to be like any other recession. Certainly what we're seeing with this one is it's not just about how much brands spend, but what they do with that spend that I think will matter. And I think that principle will stand up more than it has done perhaps in any other period.
Okay, Christian, whose camp are you in?
I'm a bit of both as well. Insofar as we just heard, I think it was right to pull back on spend at the very early beginning of this recession, largely to figure out what the message should be and how to be appropriate. There's a lot of marketing out there that's still going out that just isn't appropriate at this time, and everybody needs a bit of time to assess that. So in that course, yes. Beyond that, I think now is the time to get back in. And a lot of brands are doing that. It is absolutely true that we want all of our partners and clients to be set up for success when they can sell stuff again, when they can make stuff again and then sell stuff again in various ways. And I do think continuous communication to clients and customers is incredibly important in that. And one other thing is that, yes, we do know that consumption happens in digital platforms as well, but I have yet to see how somebody can put an ad into when I'm calling a FaceTime with whomever, right? So I think just because people are using devices doesn't make that the perfect platform for brand messages. It makes it a good platform for some of them, and that's where catch-up services, VOD offerings, all of those types of things are coming in. But if there's a brand safety angle there as well, right? We're having a lot of misinformation going out there in a whole lot of social media channels. I'm not sure I'd want my brand next to that again. So I don't think that the overall media mix should be changed, or you should consider changing it based on what's happening here. It's about changing a message and how you get ahead of it when we go back to a new normal.
Okay, Sam, whose camp are you in?
So I'm in the long-term brand, maintaining or increasing spend on long-term brand. And the reason I say that is, and it's not necessarily about just increasing brand, it's about ratios. And I believe in the Burnett and Field view that, it's about degree of research that takes place as to how much you invest in activation versus brand. What you shouldn't do is reduce your brand. You should reduce your activation spend if there are less customers to convert or less demand in the market. The reason why that's important, I think it's important for us in everything we've proved in effectiveness over the last few years, is that we are here to grow our business. We're here to grow our long-term margins for our business, and by turning stuff off isn't going to help us when we come out the other side. We want to come out as a strong brand, maintaining our brand strategy and our brand metrics, so that we can then dial up potentially our activation spend on the other side. So I agree with the point around, it might have been okay or right to turn or dial down in the interim, but I think that's about, can brands adapt their strategy to be relevant at a time like this? If they can't, get off TV. because that's not going to do you any favors. It's not going to drive your brand metrics up. Ultimately, what you want is to be relevant, even more relevant and emotive at this time, and then maintain your spend, but appreciating that that might not be the right answer if you are unable to be relevant.
So we all agree.
We do. I would only the only build I'd have on that is I think all of that's best practice and maybe not indicative of how the market in general will behave. It's how it should behave. I'm not convinced it's how it will behave though.
No, we all know.
I think that's the long-term, short-term thing, which is really important, because if you've got a small company with small cash, with a limited cash flow, you can't afford to advertise. You know, our long-term brand strategy and advertising is proven by the impact it has on sales over 3 years, so TV sales over 3 years, and then we plan to lifetime value over 5 years or more. So, you know, so we are counting on revenue or margins. If you look at the spend and then the impact of that spend over 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now, we can afford to do that because we're a business that has a strong existing customer base, and therefore we're making decisions over how we want to maintain growth over time. Other businesses don't have that luxury. Other businesses will have to turn off spend because if they don't, they'll go bust. So you've got to play it practically by, you know, what the brand, whether the brand's relevant, and whether that allows you to maintain your growth. But I think if you have the luxury of being able to maintain spend and your FD, your financial directors behind you, then absolutely I agree with maintaining the investment.
So Natalie, you make a point there whether the industry will follow marketing science and logic or not. And Sorrell, in what he was saying, has his own narrative to spin there, that everyone's going to move more dollars to digital. But what I'm wondering is, will brands learn the lesson from the last recession and focus a little less now on short term and take the longer term planning route and brand build? Do you think this might be a wake up call, or do you agree that with Sorrell that people will flood the market in digital and short-term tactics after this recession?
Well, I certainly hope it's a wake-up call, and I think we are at least starting to see some different sorts of behaviours, which is encouraging. I suppose the point I made before about, you know, it's not just about how much brands spend, and that the conversation needs to be a bit more nuanced than that. There's a real opportunity to think differently right now about the role of the brand in people's lives and being more in tune with the times that we're in. You know, it might be staying topical and relevant. It could be identifying and responding to a genuine consumer need without appearing opportunistic. And there have been some just great examples of that already. You know, brands that have really innovated and they've moved quickly. You know, LVMH were one of the first major companies to start using their infrastructure to make hand sanitizer. And they did it unbranded, which I thought was a great move. McCain's, again, that's one of the brands that we look after. They pulled their TV investment forward from May. So they obviously bucked the trend of, you know, money going the other way. And I think in literally about 5 days, they managed to reproduce and recut and re-voice over an existing creative with, I don't know if you've seen it, but just an incredibly powerful and uplifting message of everyone getting through this together that in other times might have appeared quite trite, but it literally in the time that we're in just felt absolutely spot on.
Right. And Sam, during this time, how do you convince sort of CFOs and senior management to spend more money during this time? Is that just a fool's errand to walk into their office and ask for more money?
It is if it's the first time you walk into their office, absolutely. I think what marketers need to do is to build a relationship with the finance department, with the CFO, as we have, and demonstrate continuously the investment in capability and effectiveness in return on investment, and then use that, and that earns trust that you've built through that process to then go in and ask to maintain your spend. And actually, for a business like us, where we have spent a lot of time in investment, and it's very investment in time and educating the teams internally, for us, it hasn't been a conversation we've needed to have yet. So, in fact, the conversation from the CFO has been, we know you probably need to maintain spend. What options are there out there, particularly around performance spend, where you're seeing reduced ROI, what does that mean in terms of before and after the crisis? So, but that wouldn't have happened had we not invested 2, 3, 4, 5 years in maintaining that credibility, building the credibility, and demonstrating to the science part of marketing, not just the art. I think those brands that are still known internally, or marketers that are still known internally as the colouring in department, no chance. That money will be switched off. And I think it all comes down to the credibility that a marketer and their department earn within a business.
But do you think that at the end of this, let's say budgets are tight, Q4, things are picking up, there's going to be a bit more of an obsession of what does that media channel drive to your business? That obsession with short-term measurement tactics. Do you think that that's going to be more pronounced at the end of this?
Yeah, and I think it'd be more pronounced because of the shift we're going to see potentially in the market in the back end of the year, because things will get more expensive. And I think the challenge for brands then is to make sure they're focusing on the blended impact of things like TV costs, because whilst we're seeing deflation now, we're going to see serious inflation in the back end of the year, probably. Now, those brands might go, well, we can't afford that, we're switching off. So it's not just what's happening right now, it's the impact on what's happening right now on the future media pricing. I'm really worried, going back to the point of online versus offline, and we're really worried that we tip back into short-termism as we head potentially into recession, because I think we've seen over the last few weeks a really good uplift in trust, probably for consumers on broadcast media because of the way the news has been covered. We've seen the Prime Minister doing updates, we've seen the Queen doing updates on TV. So that medium has seen an uplift in kind of the trust. And I think on the same point, I think if you look at national press brands and their online platforms, the trust they're gaining there as well, and going, actually, it's not about fake news, it's about good journalism, good news coverage online. So I think we will see coming out of this a positive shift in both of those. And I'm really, really hoping that we don't really take advantage of that, going back into short-termism and damage some of that trust through excess frequency, bombardment, all the kind of unintended consequences of short-termism. And I think if we're starting to also see a build in connected TV opportunities, ad VOD, it would be really easy for us to do what we've done in digital to TV, and that for me is a concern as we come out of this period into the end of this year.
Now, our final area here, we're going to look at the sort of consumer and brand response post-COVID. I'm fascinated with this area, with what will consumers do when the shackles of COVID are taken off? Will we act like a bunch of animals and go bananas, travel, spend, etc., or will it be a very cautious consumer response? Providing everyone can stay afloat, I think people will be filling pubs as soon as possible will be one outcome. I'm going to cite Sorrell again. He said this. He says that in Q2 it will be a bloodbath, Q3 will be slightly better, but we'll see a sharp recovery in Q4. Brands will then let rip. This will be a V-shaped recession. So Sam, question to you. Will you let rip in Q4?
We won't let rip in Q4. We'll stick to our strategy. Absolutely. Retailers will. I think Christmas is, there's lots of revenue. So I think we will see a let rip through, I think, some of the sort of toy retailers, clothes retailers, etc., who have really suffered through this period, would be my guess, but not us.
Okay, Natalie, you obviously look after a wide range of clients. What are you expecting consumers to do when we magically pop out of this? Are you anticipating a sort of a different consumer post-COVID?
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to my first meal out again. That will be whenever that might be. But without getting into, I suppose, political discussions, I think it's becoming quite clear we're not going to magically pop out of this. It's more likely to be a slow drip of measures relaxing, and that might affect different audiences and different businesses in different ways at different times. So it's a little bit harder to predict on that basis, because actually 2 or 3 weeks ago, the conversations we were having were, what happens when lockdown ends, and the tone of it's just completely changed in the last week, which I think is just a really important point. And the key thing we need to keep coming back to this, is just to stay in tune with what's happening with consumers, what's going on in the rhythm of their lives, and just read the room. That sort of collective national sigh of relief, thank goodness that's all over with. It might not be like that in reality. We were also thinking about, sort of specific shifts and things that we've seen in consumer behaviour that might sustain post-lockdown and potentially beyond, to some extent or another. It is interesting to think about what might be sticky, what we might default, more back to how things were. As you say, everyone just itching to get back to pubs, but how we work, how we shop, how we connect with people, how we look after our mental and physical health. That's obviously been of great importance in this period. How we entertain ourselves, and the chance we've all had to sort of reflect on what our priorities really are. And I think that stuff is sort of slightly harder to predict. You've got one end of the spectrum where sort of Ritson says literally nothing will change, and then obviously an endless think piece is saying nothing will be the same again. Invariably, I think the answer is probably somewhere in between, although less exciting answer, sorry.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess it depends also whether consumers have any money in their pockets, whether we actually go out and start spending money. And Christian, this is your area, you're a consumer insight guy, so what are Viacom sort of planning for at a top level, what people are going to do as we come out of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, understanding consumers is what I'm supposed to be doing, so that's my job. So less from a Viacom perspective, more from the consumer perspective. I do believe there will be pent-up demand for certain things, right? And that's definitely going to come in a bumper crop, and that could be toys, that could be other physical things. So all of that type of stuff is definitely going to come. But I agree with Natalie as well that I do think this is a longer term thing. There is rethinking going on of how do we do things, what do we do. Certainly, I mean, we're looking at travel as one of the areas that is likely going to be the last one to get back to any sort of normality. I mean, basically every event that's been scheduled until the end of the calendar year has been cancelled. And I think there's these two elements. One is, when is it feasible to put events on again? And when do people feel comfortable to actually show up to them? And they're two different things. We're certainly not going to see masses of international travelers on planes going to cheap beach destinations. I just can't see that happening this year. Which means that there's going to be a knock-on effect of saying, what does that mean? Is there going to be more travel in winter than there would have otherwise been? Because you don't want to if you have the money, you don't want to let go of all of your vacation days and not go anywhere. So I do think this is a much more longer haul than anybody's really talking about, and certainly than most of the thought pieces are out there saying everything's going to be different. I don't think everything's going to be different, but I do think it's going to take a lot longer to get back to where we were before this than a lot of people think.
Well, it's a good place to end it on, and I want to thank all three of you for your time, participating, providing your insights and expertise. And I would, to my live audience, like to give you guys a round of applause, but of course that is not possible, so I'll have to do it myself. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I look forward to seeing you in the flesh one day soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.